I'm Bryce Myers, and this is my presentation on flipped learning and grammar, how we can teach grammar in a flipped learning model classroom. So, just to give you a little roadmap of where I'm going to introduce this project and the framework for discussing it, and then I'm going to move on to the steps involved in that framework and give you my thoughts on how we can teach grammar in a flipped model classroom. So I chose grammar because I love grammar. I love everything about grammar. I love the theory behind it. I love the practice of it. As you can see, I get really excited when I get new grammar textbooks. And something else about me, I believe in the flipped model of a classroom. It's a part of blended learning. It's a specific approach within blended learning where students prepare to participate in class activities outside of class. And then during class, they practice what they've learned, and then they reflect on it and are assessed outside of classroom. But it's not conducive to teaching grammar, and we'll find out a little bit more about that in the coming slides. But trying to marry those two is somewhat difficult. And it's difficult because you can find books and articles on teaching writing in a flipped setting, teaching reading in a flipped setting, just flipped classrooms more generally. You can find all of these, but there's nothing on teaching grammar in a flipped context. And so I wanted to change that. I see that as a problem, and so I'm using this problem-solving model with the steps laid out there: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, and share. And I go through each of these steps in this presentation in turn. So you'll remember that the first step was empathizing with the individuals who have the problem. No one wants to be, I think the genesis of the problem is that no one wants to be instructed in grammar through memorization or correction or tedious drills, the sorts of ways that we know to teach grammar. And also that grammar can be very personal. It can be a sign of status and prestige. It can be a sign of identity, a marker of identity, and correcting it or being seen to criticize it can be a very personal act, and it can reflect upon the individual. Students often also learn grammar in a way that doesn't connect with them. The why am I learning this question can seem particularly relevant when it comes to grammar. Students very rarely see why it is that they have to teach grammar. In fact, indeed, we talk a lot about should we even teach grammar anymore to begin with. It seems to me that there's no way to get around it, that at some point in time we do have to teach grammar in order to be able to communicate coherently at all. And the question is then, how do we do that? But this really isn't my problem. The way that students feel about grammar isn't the problem that I'm addressing here today, and I don't purport to make grammar more appealing. But I do believe that a flipped model can help make grammar more appealing, more palatable, and it can help us teach it in a way that's most effective. But, as discussed earlier, there's no real way, there's no established ideas for teaching grammar in a flipped context. And so that is the problem as I define it in the next step and as I articulate it here. And that's what I try to approach in this presentation. So the next step is defining the problem. The problem is that there's no established way to teach grammar in a flipped classroom, but unpacking that, there's really a series of different problems. So remember, a flipped classroom involves in class and out of class. There's no real template for creative ways to instruct outside of class using technology. And there's no real creative in-class practices. And those are two separate issues. But for this presentation, I put all that aside and I focus on the specific problem of how to structure a flipped classroom with respect to grammar, and how to teach grammar conceptually in a flipped classroom. And my view is that the lesson content and the innovative ways of presenting it outside of class and practicing it in class all stem from that one thing. Consider this. This is from a 10th edition of a grammar textbook. It was released in 1722, so if it was the 10th edition, it's at least from 1702. It's pre-independence, of course. And it says, a derivative word is made of one word and a syllable coming after it, which is called a termination, such as ed in painted, en in golden, ess in countess, est in readest, eth in speaketh, ish in foolish, ist in artist, ous in covetous, ly in kindly, and several others. Oh my gosh. What a snooze fest. It is a dry text. It is on paper. The rules, as you can see, are numbered. There's no real graphics. There's no text structure that would engage anybody. It's just a list of dry, written rules. But surely, in the preceding 300 plus years, we came up with something better, right? Surely, we came up with something more meaningful. This is a textbook on grammar from 2014. It reads, the preposition like means similar or similarly to. It should be followed by an object of the preposition, noun, pronoun, noun phrase, not by a subject and a verb. Rule of thumb, avoid like when a verb is involved. Instead of like, use as if, as though, or the way when following a comparison with a subject and a verb. Wow. It does not appear that grammar changed much in 3 centuries. As you can see, there's still numbered rules. They're still presented on pages where the structure is not engaging. If you went through the books, you'd find that they had exercises, that they had drills. It is just a very plain way of teaching grammar. And if you got a teacher who was particularly frisky, they might have you do Mad Libs to practice grammar. Don't have too much fun, right? So grammar hasn't changed in a long time, and the problem really is how a discipline that is still worth teaching that hasn't changed in so long can catch up with the new times and the flipped model of classroom and blended learning. The next step in the problem-solving model is ideating. Coming up with ideas, generating approaches to fix this. And the question then becomes, how do we teach grammar, or how should we teach grammar that is conducive to a flipped model? And there's guidance from the literature. So Anderson tells us grammar and mechanics are a means for effective writing. In other words, what he's saying is stop teaching grammar for grammar's sake. Make it clear that there's a purpose. Make teaching grammar part of the practice of writing that we're already teaching, and make it clear that the reason for teaching grammar isn't just because we want people to remember random arbitrary rules, but that it makes that writing clearer. Nodin released a book and an article on using art as a metaphor on how grammar makes writing clearer. And what he says is that there are fundamental structures, and that's like the broad sketch, and then the details are things that we practice, correct word usage, punctuation, stuff like that. I always think of Bob Ross when I think of Nodin, and how Bob Ross always was focused on the details and how that really made the picture, how we can teach our students that they can become better writers if they practice the detailed techniques. Paulette also tells us that we can teach grammar in the process of teaching writing. So not just to link it to writing, not just to give it a purpose within writing, but use the writing process to teach. And Weaver tells us that the relevant research confirms that this is the best way to teach. That we don't need to teach grammar as a formal system. If our aim is for students to use grammar more effectively and conventionally in their writing, that what we should do is we should teach them it in the context of their writing. So now we know we can teach grammar through the process of writing. What we also know is that we can teach writing and grammar nested in it in a flipped model. Johansson and Cherry Paul in 2016 offer a roadmap for how a typical writing workshop can be changed into a flipped model. A typical writing workshop includes a mini lesson and conferences. The mini lesson can be given outside of class through technology. The conferences can be held in class, and you can integrate activities in that. And as long as you can integrate grammar into that process as you can in a brick and mortar classroom, then you can teach grammar in a blended classroom theoretically. So this leads to the prototype. In this case, the prototype is 3 slides from a PowerPoint presentation that would be recorded much in the way this is and given to students to watch. In this case, the specific example that's being used is homonyms, demonstrating the difference between your and your. In the process, teaching what a contraction is, teaching how to use appropriate punctuation within the context of a contraction, and emphasizing the reason to care is clarity. In fact, in the first slide, you can't tell this, but I give an example where you say you're superior, you're telling somebody that they are better than everybody else, but if you say you're superior, you're referring to their boss. And that the appropriate word choice can actually change the meaning of a sentence. Then we move on to the process, where learning these conventions leads to using them to proofread one's paper and others, which leads to everyone understanding everyone's writing better, and then the guide to proofreading in the last slide. Now, this problem-solving method requires 2 more steps. The first is testing, and there's sort of an unfulfilling slide for testing at this point. I have not tested this yet, but I have 2 concepts for testing. First is testing it conceptually by asking if it conforms to the standards of the 5 sources used to construct the idea. Is it a writing workshop? Well, yes, it is. These students are learning this mini lesson and then presumably would exercise the proofreading the next day in class. Is it consistent with a flipped model approach? Yes, the mini lesson's taught outside of class. The mini lesson is then implemented through discussion and conferencing the next day in class. Does it teach grammar? It does. This is a guide for how we can integrate grammar into the mini lessons that are necessary for teaching writing. And does it do so in context? It absolutely does. It teaches students that the rules are not arbitrary but make a difference in their writing. Now, the second concept for testing is testing it in a real-world classroom. I don't have access to a real-world classroom at the point that I'm doing this presentation, but I will in the spring of 2018, and I intend to do so. But until that time, I don't consider it fully tested. And then finally, sharing. So I've already created but not gone live yet with my professional teaching website. You can see a clip of it here, a screenshot of it here. The website is a space for where I'll share this PowerPoint. You can see it all the way on the right, a presentation on a flipped model approach to teaching grammar. The website has 2 purposes. One is to share my work, to let others see my work, critique my work, learn from my work, benefit from it, but also to put myself out there. I'm going to be going on the job market, and I want people to be able to see my work and the quality of my work and the thought that I put into my work, and this does so. So that is my problem-solving presentation with respect to teaching grammar in a flipped model classroom. I hope that it is useful to others. I would really love to know anybody's thoughts on this. Thank you.